Hey everyone, welcome back to Room 237. Coming at you with, I guess, a random video, a very heavy heart video. I don't really make a lot of these, I don't really like to, but this is someone that really deserved it. If you follow my channel, I haven't really mentioned them a lot, but when I do, I praise them. When it comes to comedy, there's no one funnier to me than Monty Python. To me, Python is a huge part of my life. And, back in, I think it was January 1989, one of the 6 members, Graham Chapman, passed away. So in 2014, when they did their reunion, Monty Python Live, mostly, the Blu-ray is called 1 Down, 5 to Go. It's kind of a dark humor, but... And now, as of yesterday, January 21st, 2020, they are now 2 down, 4 to go. Because, actually, at the time of making this video, it's the 23rd, so 2 days ago, on the 21st, the world lost Terry Jones. Terry Jones is, of course, 1/6 of Monty Python, and sort of like a band. When you have a band, each person brings equal different thing to the group. Python was no exception. I mean, each member had their own distinct style of everything, and Jones was, I would have to credit Jones with being the reason why Monty Python was so absurd, bizarre, and surreal. That was his shtick. He was really into just making things as absurd as possible. And, Python is one of those things, no matter what I see, if I don't have it, I have to get it. Like, I'm wearing my Silly Walks t-shirt. Saw this, even little magazines like this, I gotta pick up. My girlfriend got me this big book, which pretty much script and pictures of every episode. I've already made a video of my entire Python collection, so I haven't pulled everything. But, of course, there's also Holy Grail, Life of Brian, and The Meaning of Life. And if you ever want a wonderful documentary, Almost the Truth, a 6-hour documentary, can't get better than that. Life of Python, I found this at a flea market, had to get it. And then, of course, the 16-ton Flying Circus box set. Now, the reason why I pulled all these movies and shows again is because not only was Terry Jones just a fantastic writer or a performer of the material, but he was also great behind the camera. I mean, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, to me, is the funniest movie ever made. Like, Chicago Tribune, pure comic genius. This is the funniest movie ever made to me. He co-directed this with Terry Gilliam, which Terry Gilliam, he's very visual. Of course, he did all the animations for the Flying Circus, but, the great cinematography, when there is great cinematography, like the ship coming out of the fog, stuff like that, that's Terry Gilliam. He knew how to make the shots look great. Terry Jones knew how to get the jokes on the camera the best way possible. For example, the scene when they're trying to tell Sir Bedivere that this woman's a witch. We're looking up at Sir Bedivere, played by Jones. But then when we look at the commoners yelling, she's a witch, and why, the camera's looking down at them, and we get this triangle of the 3 characters. Jones knew how to make everything look as great, funny, and natural as possible. Like, but the two clashed pretty hard over this film, so their next two films, moron, he took sole responsibility for being the director. Terry Gilliam did art direction. And funny enough, with these two films, at one time, there's a non-Monty Python film he did called Personal Services. I don't remember what year it came out. But at that time, there was 4 films ever to be banned in Ireland. 3 of them were Terry Jones directed. These 2, the Personal Services one, and then some other film. The Personal Services ban was lifted after 2 months, but yeah, he directed both of these. And the scene where Palin is, so he has the lisp, and then Chapman as Biggest Dickus has, the opposite lisp. Like, one talks, like, his awes, then the other one has, like, so the whole crowd is laughing at them. And, of course, everyone there's foreign. Jones thought it'd be a good idea to get a comedian to tell him all jokes to get the crowd laughing, and it wasn't working. So then Jones told the translator, tell them to do what I do. So he threw himself on the ground, started laughing, kicking and screaming, and the whole crowd started doing it. Fortunately, the cameras weren't on, so they never got a good take. But that's just an example of Jones really knowing how to get the best shot, especially if it was meant to be funny. Now, just a little bit of history leading up to the Flying Circus and the creation of Monty Python. Jones, just like the other 5 Pythons, was very, very, very intelligent, very academic, went to very prestigious schools. Like, he attended and graduated Oxford in the early 60s with a degree in English, but he said he strayed more towards history, especially the medieval period. And even life since Python, he became a very well-respected historian. He wrote many books and articles of the period. He also wrote a lot of children's books. In 2016, I think it was it 2016 or 14? It was the last few years he received a Lifetime Achievement Award. But while at Oxford, he met fellow Python Michael Palin. And they really hit it off because they both loved comedy. But they also knew that comedy, you could not just tell jokes. You could make unique, bizarre characters. And you can be as absurd and bizarre as possible. And from there, he was a writer for the Frost Report in 66 and 67, which was a sketch show that Cleese was on, John Cleese. And then when that show ended, he was a writer and a star in Twice a Fortnight in 1967 with Palin and other people. And then the next big one before Python was Don't Adjust Your Set from 67 to 69 with Eric Idle and Michael Palin. And then once that went down, everyone involved, and then in different shows, because Graham Chapman was in the Frost Report, I believe. They got together and they formed, it's twice I've done that now, Monty Python's Flying Circus, which to me is the funniest sketch comedy show ever written. All these cases are upside down, so I will fix that. There's never been a sketch show that has quite been formatted this way, with this type of humor, these kinds of characters. I mean, they had no idea how they were going to do Python. And then, the traditional way to do a skit in all sketch shows, even done today, Saturday Night Live, Mad TV, everything, Key and Peele, Chappelle Show, you have the opening of the skit, the premise and jokes, the punchline, the closing, and the ending of the skit. Move on to the next one. The Flying Circus just would have skits that wouldn't end. They would have skits that would go on forever. A skit wouldn't even have a punchline. It would like zoom into the TV. Whatever's on the TV would be the next skit, or it would go out the window and the same thing. It was a steady stream of consciousness, and that was Terry Jones's idea. It was his idea to make it that way and to be that bizarre and outlandish. And Eric Idle wrote by himself, Terry Gilliam animated by himself, Cleese wrote with Chapman, which means Cleese wrote and Chapman gave jokes, and Jones and Palin wrote together. And when you're watching the show, you can really tell their brand of humor, because theirs were more about characters. Theirs was more about story and storytelling through characters, a lot of times through the most absurd things possible. Like, Eric Idle was the wordplay guy. Cleese and Chapman was like the food, animals, and reference book humor. But, Palin and Jones especially, they loved to mix just the most absurd and intellectual at the same time. Like the communist quiz show where there's all these famous communists, and Eric Idle's the game show host, but he just asked questions about the World Cup. Jones played Karl Marx in that skit. And I believe it was the beginning of season 3 where spam where it used to open with Michael Palin with the it's man, then with Cleese saying now for something completely different. I think it was from season 3 onward there was the naked pianist, where Jones would just be sitting naked at a piano and he would hit a few notes. That was nothing. He loved to be naked. I mean, the Vow of Silence guy in Life of Brian, he was stark naked. And he had so many memorable characters. From Flying Circus in the 3 films, I know there's 4. There is Now for Something Completely Different. But that's basically just like remakes of classic episodes for the sake of bringing it to America. But I mean, in the Flying Circus, you had the naked piano player. You had Ron Obvious, who was this guy that, he wanted to break world records, and his overzealous manager, who I think was Palin, would televise all these great feats, like jumping over the English Channel, or eating Chichester Cathedral, or running to Mercury. Then at the end, it was most time spent underground, and there was a tombstone that said very talented. The owner of the diner with Spam. And that was another thing. All Pythons played drag. John Cleese's was kind of horrific. Eric Idle's was more believable. He didn't really have to alter his voice. Palin and Chapman kind of, looked like men in drag, but Jones was the most believable because he always played the most, I think Eric Idle said it best, the most ratbag, haggy ladies possible. Example, just look at Life of Brian, Brian's mother, Mandy. Just that, that Spam voice, but like with moles and just ratbag ladies. Jones was the best at that. And I think that was his signature type of character. And it never got old with him. There was another skit, a Visitors in the Night, where Jones is the wife, Palin's the husband, who hears a noise, but she says, go back to sleep. He's like, okay. Because all these different kinds of people keep coming to the window because they're Jones's lover. Or the guy that has like this row of mice that he trained to squeak at a certain frequency when they're hit with a mallet. So they're supposed to be singing a symphony as he's banging all these mice. Cardinal Biggles in the Spanish Inquisition, which in that skit, the old lady they torture is actually his mother. Brian's mother, Mandy, which Jones plays, is an exaggeration of his own mother. But recurring, I guess, archetypes of characters that Jones would play other than just haggy ladies was like the sophisticated upper class English gentleman that has to deal with whatever quirky character is in the skit, like nudge nudge. Eric Idle keeps going nudge nudge, and Jones just kind of has to go with it. Or he's the customer of Michael Palin's homicidal barber. You know, he's sort of like the put on kind of guy, sort of like how Palin also was a lot of times. But Jones has felt more natural. Or a Barry Zeppelin, the guy that blows these huge balloons at increasing size. The last one goes backwards and he inflates into a balloon. You know, just tons of characters just from the Flying Circus. And then when you get into the Holy Grail, I mean, he's Sir Bedivere the Wise. He's the left head of the three-headed knight, who's, you know, he's the mean one. Jones is mean, Chapman's neutral, Palin's nice. My favorite character of his is Herbert, Prince of Swamp Castle, because he's so fucking pathetic. He seemed to change his size a lot too. Like, he would sort of look normally built, but then he would do characters like Herbert or the bendy arm guy in Find the Fish, where he seemed really small. But, you know, he was just, he played pathetic so great as Herbert. You know, like, like, one day, lad, all these will be yours. What, the curtains? No, not the curtains, lad. I can't start quoting Holy Grail because I'll be here all night. Or, and then if you notice, from Life of Brian and Meaning of Life, he played less characters. I don't know if it was because where he was directing, he had to play less. But I mean, really, Brian's mom, Mandy, the Vow of Silence guy, and the Good Samaritan at the end. Which, the way he plays the Good Samaritan, just, like all the other Pythons, just totally committed, just stays, that fits that character so perfectly. Goes up to Brian and he's like, let me share your burden, brother. Well, he doesn't go up to Brian, he goes up to the guy behind him. So he has to carry his cross. Guy runs off, so then the Romans are whipping him because they think it's his. And then they're putting him up on the cross and he's like, well, will you let me down if he comes back? Sells it perfectly. And then, of course, the Meaning of Life, you have my favorite Terry Jones character, Mr. Creosote. The hideously obese guy that just vomits all over this fancy restaurant. One of my favorite Python bits. It's my favorite Jones bit. You know, he was, of course, the ratbag wife in Every Sperm is Sacred. He was Biggs, the student in the sex ed class, and then, you know, at war with a rare skit where you have all 6 of them. You know, he's the lieutenant, I think he was, Biggs. another sort of wife, like Every Sperm is Sacred, Mrs. Brown, in Live Organ Transplant and the Galaxy Song. And then, of course, Find the Fish, where he's the, I wonder where that fish has gone. He's got these long, bendy arms that just... I love that. That skit right there, the fish part could have been Cleese and Chapman, but that just kind of absurdity with, you know, his arms like this and Chapman looking like Lady Gaga. That's the absurdity. Like, Jones and Palin would just say, go with it. And, you know, those are just some of the characters that I could name. I haven't yet said how he passed away. It is really sad. When they got together for their reunion in 2014, he had a hard time remembering his lines, and people kind of caught on. And in 2015, he was officially diagnosed with a form of aphasia. See if I can get it right here. I know it's aphasia, which is a frontotemporal form of dementia. I just want to get the actual... Oh, and he wrote an early draft for Labyrinth with David Bowie, but the final product had very little of what he had written. Primary progressive aphasia, a form of frontotemporal dementia that impairs the ability to speak and communicate. He was diagnosed in 2015, and in 2016, he couldn't give interviews anymore. And then April 2017, Michael Palin came out and said he can no longer communicate outside of just a few words of agreement, very seldomly, which is very sad. But I mean, Palin stayed with him his whole life. I mean, they were such close friends, work colleagues, comedy companions for almost 60 years. Palin visited him several times a week. There's already a video of him sharing his memories. It really is sad. I mean, sure, everyone has their favorite Python. Like, mine is John Cleese, but Jones was always one of my favorites as well. And while trying to think of how I wanted to word that, while some of the other guys might have played more characters, Jones really knew how to get the stuff on camera, especially when it came to directing. I mean, it's a mixed bag with Holy Grail, but Brian in Life, he did such a great job directing it. And that example of how to get a crowd to laugh and do the same thing, he did that all the time. And he always directed in his character's outfit. So, like, he directed Holy Grail, usually like Sir Bedivere. And he's also the guy that gave us some of the best lines, like, he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. From, I didn't want to do it too loud, my girlfriend's sleeping. And Life of Brian is one of the greatest comedy quotes of all time. And I posted a rest in peace thing on my Facebook, and the quote I put was, afterlife mints. Because in the meaning of life, when everyone dies from eating the salmon mousse, except for Michael Palin, they get up to the reception of heaven, and Terry Jones finds a little bowl of afterlife mints. So I thought that was a fitting quote. But Terry Jones will be missed. I mean, he really was 1/6 of the group. He brought just as much as any other person in the group, but he's also responsible for getting it on the screen the best way possible. And, you know, he directed other films, wrote children's books. He got the Lifetime Achievement Award. I mean, Terry Jones is an icon. He's a legend. And it's really sad to see him go. In fact, just to show the friendship between Jones and Palin, I saw this one video where I guess Jones, he's always a talker. He's always telling stories or talking. He likes to, you know, go for rides, but he has a thing for telling people directions on like which route he likes the best. And Palin was saying how once his disease was kicking in, he could tell it was frustrating him because he couldn't communicate to give the right directions. And, you know, he was kind of chuckling, saying like, oh, what's wrong, Terry? Oh, come on, tell him. And that's not verbatim, but something to that effect. And that to me is a sign of a beautiful friendship, where something awful can be happening, but your friends can still find the humor in it. And he always had a taste for dark humor, as did the rest of the Pythons. And I know he's going to have a bigger legacy than what I have, but, you know, he is 1/6 of the genius that made this. And he will be missed. Absolute legend. It is bittersweet, because, I mean, he's not suffering anymore. I do know dementia can be very nasty and painful and hard for those around, you know, for loved ones. So he's not suffering anymore. He's with Graham now. And we will forever have the just hilarious, you know, comedic genius legacy that he helped leave behind. And just on behalf of all fans of Monty Python, Terry Jones, and, you know, anyone that might be involved with him, his family, friends, anyone does see this, may he rest in peace. And, you know, he'll always bring laughter. And, you know, he loves history. People will learn from his history books. Children will read his children's books. And, you know, we will always be able to laugh at his, you know, hideous female characters and just all the crazy stuff he did, brilliantly directed by him. So Monty Python is now 2 down, 4 to go, as they would say. And Terry Jones, rest in peace. You will be very missed. Thank you all for watching.